Morning, everybody. It is 7 o'clock. You are very welcome to join us on The Breakfast Show here on Sky News. Some difficult choices facing the Chancellor this morning as public sector pay pressures grow, with more potential strikes around the corner from other workers. New talks today to try to end the rail strikes. The rail union boss calling for coordinated industrial action on this programme yesterday. So, do public sector workers deserve a pay rise closer to inflation? The latest figures on that are coming out within the next few moments. We'll bring them to you, of course. Plenty to ask the Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab about very shortly. We'll also speak to a criminal barrister who's just voted to strike about why he's doing it. And we'll ask the Shadow Culture Secretary Lucy Powell about those Labour MPs who joined picket lines. Should they be sacked? It's Wednesday, the 22nd of June.
Talks between the unions and rail bosses to resume here today to try to break the deadlock as pressure over pay grows from across the public sector.
I'm live at a food importing business in Sidcup. The latest inflation figures are expected as the cost of living crisis continues to bite.
Preventing trivial human rights claims. The government plans to override decisions made by the European Court of Human Rights after it blocked the deportation of asylum seekers to Rwanda. No walking stick. We'll discuss these new pictures of the Queen with the royal author Robert Hartman. Also coming up on the programme for you this morning.
After a 2-year hiatus, Glastonbury Festival is back with Sir Paul McCartney among the headliners. We'll be live at Worthy Farm, but will revellers face a battle to get here?
We'll look ahead to that summer of festivals as life after COVID returns, with Glastonbury and Hyde Park back this weekend with the music journalist Paul Stokes. Good morning, everybody. A busy show today with rail strike talks set to resume and a move to stop the European Court of Human Rights stopping asylum seekers being deported to Rwanda. The Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab with us shortly to discuss all of that. We begin, though, with breaking news on the cost of living. Likely to hear that from our business presenter, Helen Ann Smith, any moment now. What are we expecting, Helen Ann?
Yeah, so we're expecting those figures any moment now, Kay. They just haven't dropped just yet, but we'll bring them to you as soon as they do. It will be the inflation figures for the month, 12 months to the month of May, how much those prices have risen. We're all feeling it in our lives, aren't we, that the prices are really going up. Last time these figures were released, they were at 9% inflation, and we heard from the Bank of England just a few weeks ago that that's expected to tip up to about 11% later this year. So huge inflation numbers. This month, we're not actually expecting them to hit quite that high. The consensus from economists is that it'll tip up slightly to about 9.1%, but that's slightly because some of the big inflationary pushes we're expecting to see are coming in a little later this year, perhaps in October. So that's up to this point, inflation, we expect, and as I said, we're still waiting for those figures to drop. I've just got them here now for you. So the CPI, that's the Consumer Price Index, rose by 9.1% in the 12 months to May. So that was precisely what economists were expecting, tipping up a little bit there from the 9% we had. 9.1% inflation. That's huge, and everyone's feeling it in their lives. You might ask, hey, why I'm wearing a big, huge jacket and a cap here? I'm actually at a food importing business. We're in a chilled room, so this is a big, warm coat. We're quite cold in here at the moment. Things will start waking up here shortly. Essentially, lots of trucks coming in from Europe, bringing fresh fruit and vegetables. They'll get repacked and sent around the UK. The big cost they're facing, that we all are, is fuel costs. Their fuel costs up 30%, and that explains a little bit as to why the food that we're buying is rising so much in cost. Everyone's feeling it in their lives, and these figures really demonstrating that 9.1% inflation in the months to May.
Yeah, last time you brought us those figures, you were with me up in Wigan. Who knows where you're going to be next month? For now, thanks very much. Thank you. To our other main story, and disruption will continue across the rail network today following yesterday's strikes, with only 60% of trains expected to run despite talks resuming today to try to break the deadlock. Most operators in England will operate a reduced Sunday level of service and are warning passengers of major delays. In Scotland, some of the main routes will operate from 7:15, but many others will only resume normal operations by early afternoon. And in Wales, the early morning services are particularly likely to be affected by delays and cancellations. As a rule of thumb, people are being advised only to travel if it's absolutely essential and to check routes and times before setting off. Emma standing by for us at Euston Station here in London, because that's where the talks are going to resume behind you later on, aren't they, Emma? Good morning.
Yes, hi Kay. So I'm at the Network Rail headquarters here, and it's here that we expect the talks to resume this morning. And we understand that on the table is a 4% pay offer. Now, the previous offer was 3%. That included 1% linked to modernisations. So this new offer, we understand 4%, but again, it requires these modernisations to be accepted, which Network Rail say will result in 1,800 job losses. However, they say the vast majority will be dealt with through voluntary redundancy and also natural wastage. So, for example, people retiring or leaving to go to another job. So that's all happening here. And behind here is Euston Station. I went in there this morning. It was absolutely empty at 6 o'clock. And the board said that the first train leaving was to Manchester Piccadilly at 7:35. And just to give you some kind of indication, normally there would have been 4 trains to Manchester by 7:35. So quite a lot of disruption today, but apparently yesterday it wasn't too chaotic. People had stayed away. They knew that this was going to happen. It will be interesting to see how things pan out later, because of course this isn't meant to be a strike day today.
OK, it isn't. Thanks very much indeed. Thanks a lot. But as we were pointing out, there's going to be all sorts of problems on the railways. Check before you travel. At best, a Sunday service, we're being told. But it'll take more than rail strikes and travel chaos to stop the army of festival lovers heading to Glastonbury today. More than 200,000 people are heading for Worthy Farm, where Sir Paul McCartney, Billie Eilish and Kendrick Lamar will be headlining this year after a 2-year hiatus because of COVID. Joining us now is Katie. So it's 3 years then since they last opened their doors. I think I'm right in saying, Katie, aren't I? Good morning.
Good morning. Yeah, as you say, 200,000 people are going to be due on site here, the size of a small temporary village that is erected here on Worthy Farm. No mean feat getting those people here, and of course many of those who had tickets were planning on taking the trains here. Over 50 special trains are usually laid on to get people to the nearest station to Worthy Farm because of those 2 days worth of strikes, the Tuesday and the Thursday, both days when people would normally travel here, because of the cancellations on those days. Now numbers have been cut in half. There's only, I think, 24 trains now running, which has meant this festival, which sort of prides itself on its green credentials, a lot of people, of course, are going to have to be driving here now or turning to coaches. Now, Glastonbury has said they're expecting this morning up until midday to be the busiest time of day. Interestingly enough, they say actually one of the peak times when people are arriving is actually 2 in the morning overnight. So while you can't actually get access at this time of day before 8 in the morning through the main gates, actually a lot of people will be already waiting in the car parks outside. A little bit of a mini festival happening outside as they wait to get in on site. But what you have to remember, Kay, this is the countryside, really small country roads, so it is going to be quite a nightmare if we have a lot more cars coming on site this year. As you say, a 2-year hiatus we've had because of the pandemic. A brilliant lineup. Sir Paul McCartney, one of the oldest performers to headlining on Saturday. That's going to be terrific, of course. And then on Friday night, the youngest solo artist to headline, Billie Eilish. So I think if people can make it here, if and when, they've got a good weekend of music ahead of them.
Big question, though, is what's the weather going to do?
Oh, well, yeah, don't ask about that. Rain is expected over the weekend, but let's just focus on the sun now, Kay.
Because I remember all those pictures, Kate. We've seen people, I mean, literally up to their armpits in mud, haven't we, in the past?
I'm blocking that out for now, Kay. We're just focusing on the traffic hell, which is going to be bad enough, and it is. We don't want to be thinking about the fact that we're going to need wellies this weekend.
OK, lovely. Thanks very much indeed, Katie. Thank you. Are you going? Are you planning to go? Why don't you tweet us directly and let us know what your plans are at Burley, or you can use the hashtag Burley if you prefer. Still to come on the programme for you, the Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab will be joining us in the studio in a second or two. Then Labour's Shadow Culture Secretary Lucy Powell will be with me just after 8. And as barristers vote to go on strike in a row over legal aid funding, I'm going to be speaking to a criminal barrister, and that's Mark MacDonald. Before that, though, let's look at some of today's other headlines for you and some breaking news this morning. Local media in Afghanistan say that at least 255 people have been killed in an earthquake in the east of the country. The 6.1 magnitude earthquake struck about 27 miles from the city of Khost. It's also shaking parts of neighbouring Pakistan, but there are no immediate reports of deaths or damage there. The Texas school where 19 students and 2 teachers were shot dead is to be demolished. Officials say police could have stopped the gunman within 3 minutes of him entering the building, but accuse police of failing to act because they prioritise the lives of officers over the lives of children.
3 minutes after the subject entered the West Building, there was a sufficient number of armed officers wearing body armor to isolate, distract, and neutralize the subject. The only thing stopping a hallway of dedicated officers from entering room 111 and 112 was the on-scene commander, who decided to place the lives of officers before the lives of children.
Riot police have used tear gas to disperse protests in the Ecuadorian capital of Quito as demonstrators became increasingly violent. Indigenous protesters have been on the street for several days, demanding lower fuel prices and a moratorium on extending mining and oil projects. A jury in the United States has found that Bill Cosby sexually assaulted a 16-year-old girl at the Playboy Mansion in 1975. The civil court awarded Judy Huth damages of $500,000. It comes nearly a year after Cosby's criminal conviction for sexual assault was thrown out and he was freed from prison. Transport Secretary has temporarily relaxed rules around airport slots to help airlines avoid last-minute cancellations due to staff shortages. Airlines will be given a short window to hand back takeoff and landing slots that they can't operate for the rest of the summer. The policy marks a U-turn for the government after it previously demanded airlines put on full flight schedules. Start warning from the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, about drought and famine in the Horn of Africa. If an intervention doesn't happen quickly, there will inevitably be the mass death of children in the coming months. In April, the self-declared Republic of Somaliland issued an emergency appeal for assistance for 1.5 million people affected by the drought. That number is up 85% since the start of the year. More than 100 schools have had to shut their doors due to lack of water. Across Somaliland and Somalia, there's been over 3,000 cases of cholera and over 6,000 cases of measles. That is, again, since the start of the year. Our International Affairs editor Dominic Waghorn reports from rural villages in the self-declared Republic of Somaliland. A warning: this report contains images of distressed children.
On what looks like the surface of Mars, the worst drought for 40 years is taking hold. On land parched dry, people are struggling to survive or fleeing. Villages are emptying. In this one, 2/3 of people have already left. But some are too sick to move, like little Decca, 7 weeks old and severely malnourished. Her mother, Ayan, was also weak and struggled to speak. The family is running out of food. Their livestock has either died or stopped producing milk, like so many others here. Under baking heat, we met Ismail Mahmoud, who's lived here 90 years and says it's the worst drought he's ever witnessed.
idinna waa og tihiin annana waa ognahay waa mid baahsan ballaaran guban iyo oogo iyo meel walba jirta waxaanaanu nidhaahnaa wixii aanu soo marray abaara ahaa tanaa nagaga xun.
The deeper inland, the worse the drought. We drove by one homestead after another, deserted by families as the drought claimed their livestock.
And this is the main homestead. And probably they had children here. They gave birth to children here, 1, 2, 3 kids here. And
so you only leave if you have to?
Yeah, that is, it's the worst, in the worst situation. Yeah. And that is the last thing they can do, leaving their homestead.
They had to leave, they had no choice?
They had no choice, surely, they had no choice.
Outside one village, we met the governor of the region. Its people desperately need help, he told us. But the drought, he says, is being made worse by the war in Ukraine. It may look busy, but in the only big flour mill in Somaliland, they are running out of grain. Russia's blockade of Ukraine means they haven't had a shipment for 3 months. Its silos are emptying, and they may soon have to stop grinding grain.
Maybe everybody will lose his job. Also, Somali population, how they will get food. In general, this war affected us as a company. As a company, we are affected by this war. That's it.
If the mill shuts down, Somaliland will lose its main source of bread. It's hard to think of a more graphic illustration of the impact of Russia's war in Ukraine on developing nations. One of the world's poorest countries literally running out of grain. Its silos standing empty, while there is millions of tons of grain stuck in Ukraine, unable to get out. War and drought now haunt Somaliland and the entire Horn of Africa, threatening a humanitarian disaster. UNICEF says without action, the mass death of children will be inevitable. And the people here know it's coming. At the last of 3 wells in this village to have any water left, camel herders had dire predictions. The drought is bad, he says, but worse is on its way. Dominic Waghorn, Sky News, Somaliland.
More from Dominic throughout the course of the week. Deputy Prime Minister is here with us. Back home, inflation record highs. What are we going to do about it?
Well, first of all, we've got to make sure we've got the strength and the fundamentals of our economy, which Rishi Sunak is doing. The investment is coming in. There are all sorts of things which show that this economy, the basics are right. In relation to inflation itself, I think that's one of the reasons why we've put such emphasis on restraint in relation to the public sector pay and some of the strike action we've seen, because we know that if public sector pay keeps going up, then it will only keep inflation high for longer. We are facing a global struggle against inflation. If you look at the UK figures, they're broadly comparable to the US, or in Europe, the Dutch and the Belgians, and it's going to be difficult. And we really do understand the pressure that those on low incomes are facing at the moment. They're struggling to make ends meet. That's why there's a £15 billion package of support, rebate £400 on energy bills, cutting national insurance next month. But we do need to have the kind of pay restraint in the public sector that we've been talking about, and which is at the heart of the challenge with the unions and RMT and the strikes we're facing. Otherwise, we'll just have the vicious cycle of inflation staying higher for longer.
So what happened to the PM saying last October, I've got the guts to make us a high-wage country?
Well, that's why we've increased the national living wage. So for those eligible workers, they got £1,000 more. In relation to those particularly reliant on universal credit but are in work, they'll get an extra £1,000. And we want to go further and faster, but we've got an immediate global challenge in relation to inflation, very much sparked by the combination of the aftershocks of the pandemic as the economies around the world have got going again, but also particularly in relation to energy, fuelled by Russia's appalling invasion invasion of Ukraine, and we've got to deal with that alongside those broader long-term initiatives.
So a high-wage country, but restraints on public sector pay, how does that square?
Because if we don't have those restraints, inflation will go higher for longer, and that will only undermine the pay packages of workers, particularly the most vulnerable workers, for a longer period of time. We are taking the action, we're taking a firm line with, for example, the RMT unions, precisely because we want to protect this erosion of pay packets by inflation. And I'm afraid if we keep seeing increase in those wages, it will create a vicious cycle which will hurt them. What RMT are doing, I think at one level for the unions, I do understand they feel their job is to protect their workers, and I understand that, but it is totally counterproductive if we follow, for example, Network Rail in the negotiations with the unions, the 3% offer. The unions are saying it must be 7%. That will only undermine the lowest paid workers' salaries for longer. And we've got to understand that vicious cycle, and we've got to avoid it.
Grant Shapps told me yesterday that the government was staying out of it.
Well, I'm just explaining to you the position. It's absolutely right, and historically, under successive governments, Network Rail and the other rail employers are the ones that engage directly with the unions. But of course, there's overall ministerial accountability for the mandate. But yes, in terms of the negotiations, that's right. That's for Network Rail to conduct.
So why given that, why doesn't the Transport Secretary get in the room with them and sort it out?
Well, do you know what? It's interesting. I'm pretty sure I heard the RMT leader saying that he didn't want to sit down with Grant Shapps.
He said he didn't say it.
Well,
I asked him yesterday.
I'm afraid, I think this is why this risk being politicised. Actually, the successive approach of governments is to have Network Rail dealing with the technical aspects of that in the room, and I think that would hopefully increase the chances of if I can say, a depoliticised approach and resolution, which we do want to see.
How long are you going to let the strike go on for?
We can't allow, I'm afraid, the unions in this very militant way that they've proceeded to win this argument, because it will only hurt the poorest in our society.
Why is it militant? They're exercising their democratic right to strike.
Well, I think, look, let me tell you why. I think there's been a £16 billion package funded by the taxpayer, the very people who are suffering as a result of this disruption to trains. That's £600 per household in this country. And I think the response, and that's to see the rail industry and all those workers through tough times during the pandemic. I think, and of course, after the pandemic, we need reforms.
But why is it militant?
Because, well, let me explain. Because of the passenger that people at the home, the work-life balance is changing, people are working more from home, and also, frankly, there's some practices that were outdated that needed to change, and to run the railways efficiently, that's absolutely right. And I think given that big bailout that the taxpayer put in, I think a lot of people will feel that they are irresponsible, the unions and RMT in particular.
Doesn't make them militant, though.
Well, actually, I think because saying that you can't win in this negotiation and then disrupting millions of people, including students who are trying to go and sit their exams, including... And by the way, Kay, it is always when we have these strikes, particularly when we're talking about the trains, that the blue-collar workers suffer the most, the people that clean...
Well, they know that, but they've still voted to strike.
Well, the RMT members have, but in broader, and that's just rail workers, but I'm just saying, the cleaners, the electricians, those who cannot work remotely, like many white-collar workers can using Teams, these are the ones that are being disrupted the most. So again, I understand why unions feel that they've got to fight the corner of their sectors, but it is the lowest paid who suffer the most from strike action, and also if we give in to this inflationary spiral that the unions' demands would lead to.
Mick Lynch spoke to me yesterday and said that he was appealing to other unions for coordinated multi-sector strikes for months to come. It's going to be your summer of discontent.
We've got unemployment at record lows, lowest level since I was born in 1974. The fundamentals of the economy are strong. We do understand all of those pressures on workers, particularly for the next year with inflation high. But if we want to get inflation down quicker, we cannot relent. And I think on these demands...
So you're happy to take on the unions head on?
I always want to avoid conflict if I can, but I think we've got to protect the public and the lowest paid, and that means not allowing a vicious cycle of higher inflation for longer. That is an argument that we must stand firm on.
You're responsible for criminal barristers in your job as Justice Secretary. They want 25%.
Well, I think it's regrettable that they voted for strike action. I mean, actually, it's only 43.5% of the CBA members balloted who supported these specific additional measures. Just to give you a clear understanding, we've already committed to a 15% fee uplift, £135 million going in. The typical criminal barrister will see an increase of £7,000. I'm introducing this regulation, it's a statutory instrument, next month. I don't think that it's the right thing to do. And I think if the CBA leadership couldn't convince over half of its membership to take these specific measures, I don't think the public will be convinced.
So they're not going to get 25%?
No, they'll get 15%, as I've already made clear.
OK. Let me talk to you about Bill of Rights. What's the need for this new Bill of Rights that you've been writing about in the papers this morning when we've already got the European Convention on Human Rights and the Human Rights Act in effect?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, we've got a proud tradition of liberty in this country. We want to reinforce the quintessentially UK freedoms, particularly freedom of speech, which we've seen whittled away in various ways. We think that that is the liberty that guards all the others. At the same time, we've seen a lot of elastic interpretations of human rights, particularly fuelled by the Human Rights Act, sections 2 and 3. I won't go into all the detail. And we think it's right to have a proper separation of powers. The UK Supreme Court should do what it says on the tin and be supreme in the legal interpretations. And if the goalposts shift, and you'll remember the whole context around prisoner voting, where we were told that we had to give prisoners the vote, I think Parliament should have the last word when it comes to the law of the land. And what our reforms will do, as I said, strengthen free speech, but curb the abuses. For example, the ability of serious foreign criminals convicted of custodial offences to frustrate their deportation on, frankly, pretty spurious grounds.
Don't European court rulings remain binding, though?
Well, no, so there's three contexts. One, in the context of case law, there's no reason why, as a matter of law, international or domestic, we need to follow, our courts need to follow the Strasbourg case law. We'll make that clear. Secondly, when it comes to individual rulings, of course, we are signatories of the ECHR. We're staying in the ECHR. I think that's important. The ECHR will remain incorporated. Well, we will, of course, when the goalposts shift, and prisoner voting is the example, when what the Strasbourg court is ultimately engaged in is judicial legislation, I think for that, we're right to make clear, as we did in prisoner voting, that Parliament has the last word on the law of the land. I think that's a sensible approach. And, of course, the Strasbourg court, particularly under Robert Spano, its current president, has talked a lot about the margin of appreciation for domestic institutions.
But the rulings remain binding.
Well, it's a matter of international law. If you get an adverse ruling against you, of course, they're binding. But what is also allowed within the margin of appreciation, where you feel that they're wrong, is to push back. It is a totally legitimate thing to press back, to avail ourselves of the margin of appreciation. Okay. And prisoner voting shows that that does not lead to us being kicked out of the Council of Europe. I remember in 2015, I went to Strasbourg. Everyone told me we'd get kicked out of the Council of Europe if we didn't give prisoners a vote. We didn't. We're still in. And we've got one of the best records of compliance.
Let me ask you this then. You say the bill will boost freedom of the press. Does that chime with number 10 intervening to get a Times article removed about the Prime Minister's wife?
Look, I don't know the specifics around that, but what I can tell you is we want to see the judge-made privacy law curtail. We think free speech in this country is something which should have a higher pecking order over, for example, the Article 8 right to privacy. Okay, well, we also want to protect journalistic sources. And I think, frankly, Kay, you know as a journalist, and a lot of people have talked about this, there's been a feeling, whether it's political correctness, whether you call it wokery, whatever the language, is that the scope for rambunctious but legitimate debate has been narrowed. I think our Bill of Rights will strengthen the space for those debates. OK, the Chair of the Common Standards Committee, Chris Bryant, says it's manifestly corrupt to appoint your lover as a special advisor. What would you say to him? I don't think that's what's happened. I think that's particularly irresponsible language. And frankly, these attacks on Carrie, I think, are deeply unsavoury.
It didn't happen because it would have been corrupt if it had happened.
Well, look, the allegations that have been made, and I've read some of the newspaper reportings, it's been roundly responded to as flawed. Those are matters for number 10 for Carrie to answer. But frankly, I think what you're seeing is a political attack on Carrie as a means to get the Prime Minister, and I think that's out of order.
Well, Lord Guy says the situation is ripe for investigation.
Well, look, as I say, I don't know the individual circumstances. The Prime Minister,
but you respect Lord Guy's views, don't you?
Of course I do, but I'm just saying I think that they've been very clear, Number 10's been very clear that these claims are flawed, so has Carrie.
Why not just have the investigation and then it clears everything up?
But well, actually what we've seen, and we've seen it on other things, there's a sort of feeding frenzy on everything or anything that is even thrown out there as a claim against the Prime Minister, or in this case his wife, and I think that's wrong.
OK, but why not just have the investigation and it's all cleared up?
Well, who's calling... I mean, Lord Gate is no longer in that position. There is going to be a successor.
You said you respect his views.
Yeah, of course I do. That doesn't mean that... there's lots of people whose views I respect, but ultimately the Number 10 have been very clear on this. And as I said, I think it's a partisan attack, and I think it's very unfortunate that Carrie is being used to attack the Prime Minister. That's not wrong.
OK, we're almost out of time. How did it fit for you earlier on in the week for size being Prime Minister again, even for a short time?
Do you know what? I don't get particularly overawed by any of that. I'm there to do a job, to support the Prime Minister when he needs me. And, you know, we've got a great cabinet. Everyone knows what they're doing. And I'm really happy to hold the reins if necessary.
Sounds like a leadership pitch to me.
No, not at all. I mean, I've said before, I won't stand again.
Well, I actually remember Michael Gove saying that to me, and then he stood again.
Yeah, I'm not quite in the same position as Michael, but look, I can only tell you what I said before. OK. We won't have to play this to you in a year's time? No. When you're standing? Okay. No, because the Prime Minister will be poised to win the next election.
Just in at the end there. It's always great to see you. Thanks so much indeed for joining us. Thank you. Quick look at the papers for you. And let's start with The Sun, labelling the rail strikes and threatened strikes by teachers as the start of a class war. Daily Mail says the Labour Party is in chaos over the dispute, while the Eye looks at the government's proposed laws to limit future strikes, saying they won't fix the crisis. The Times says Boris Johnson is prepared for the rail strike standoff to last for months. Just heard that from the Deputy Prime Minister as well, and believes the government has to win its battle with the rail unions. And instead of pay rises or safer working conditions, The Express questions whether the strikes have actually been brought about by the union bosses' hatred of Boris Johnson. Tamara's here with us. Morning. Thoughts?
Morning, Kay. Well, interesting on the proposals for a British Bill of Rights that Dominic Raab is introducing to Parliament this week, something that he has been very interested in for a long time. But lawyers are saying, is it going to work? Now, this, of course, comes hot on the heels of the Rwanda flight to take failed asylum seekers was grounded by a ruling from the European Court last week. That, of course, is nothing to do with the European Union. It's the court in Strasbourg. The government were very angry about it. And so Dominic Raab is saying today that his proposals would stop that happening, would give Parliament precedence over its court rulings. But what legal commentators are saying is that unless we leave the European Convention on Human Rights, devised in 1950... And he said that we're not going to, yeah. Yeah, indeed, by British lawyers, and some Tories want him to do that, but he's not going that far. As long as we remain signed up to it, then we will remain bound by the European Court rulings. That will be an international treaty, and unless we propose breaking international law, then when it makes a ruling, then the UK has got to listen to it. So there's a question about exactly which rulings may be disrupted by this. There's also some concern about what the Justice Secretary says in the press release about it, about how he wants to stop what he calls bogus and trivial human rights claims by people who are citing their right to a family life to stay in the UK when the government believes they should be deported, which some civil rights groups are saying is a power grab by ministers when it should be judges who decide whether a claim is bogus or not. So questions about whether this will actually work or not.
And what about what he was saying about public sector pay?
Indeed. So after Boris Johnson talked about the high-wage economy, remember when that was all the rage only 8 months ago, now they're saying, well, we have to show restraint. The public sector has to show restraint. Otherwise, we will have spiralling inflation, as we did in the 1970s. And how that squares with, for example, the decision confirmed by the Treasury yesterday to increase pensions by inflation by 10% will come as cold comfort to many public sector workers. And we know a lot more of them are planning to ballot for strike action if they don't get a pay rise that's above what is being proposed, which in many cases is about 3% for teachers and NHS workers.
This is what the RMT said yesterday.
My advice to the unions is to campaign on the issues. And ultimately, if the government and the employers do not change their direction, I believe that more ballots for strike action are inevitable and more action is inevitable. And what I would say to trade union leaders and trade union activists is we need to coordinate and synchronise our campaigning so that we can rebalance the inequalities in our society.
So Mick Lynch of the RMT there saying, I want coordinated strike action. Others should take to the pickets and demand higher pay. Dominic Raab said that they must not be allowed to win the argument with what he called their militant tactics. What not winning the argument looks like may become clear over the next couple of days, because we understand that a 4% pay rise is on the table with some efficiency savings that will need to be worked out. But 4% rise, is that winning the argument? Probably a bit more than some in the public sector will be getting, but we'll see if any more is on offer over the next few days if we are to avert what the RMT has made pretty clear is going to be many more weeks of strike action if they don't get something better than's on offer.
Criminal barristers wanting 25%. Dominic Raab saying that is not going to happen. So let's see what happens there as well. Thanks very much, Tamara. Tomorrow's take at 9 o'clock, of course. Meantime, the Queen has been pictured smiling and standing without her walking stick. She has been struggling with mobility issues over recent months, but during a meeting with the Archbishop of Canterbury, she was photographed without that walking stick. So the question is, how's she doing? And what's going to happen next? Joined by Daily Mail's Robert Hardman, author of The Queen of Our Times. Hi, Robert. Great to see you this morning. Thanks for joining us. Can you tell us, first of all, about this award that Her Majesty received yesterday?
Yes, it's a rare award for what they call unstinting service to the Church. And really, it's hard to think of anyone who's shown more unstinting service to the Church of England than its Supreme Governor. She's been Supreme Governor longer than anyone else in history. She's been probably the most devoted Supreme Governor since Henry VIII invented the role. She's incredibly close and very involved with the minutiae of church life. She takes all aspects of it very seriously. Her faith is terribly important. I mean, all through the Jubilee, we looked at so many aspects of her life. I think what was slightly underplayed was the role her faith has played. And it's not just a question of going to church every Sunday and being closely involved with all her bishops. I mean, she's done things like transform the Maundy service we have every Maundy Thursday. She's picked that up, turned it into a major event, moved it around the country every year. You know, these are things that they're little things, but over the years, her devotion to not just the Church of England, but also to other faiths as well. And she's the first Supreme Governor of the Church of England to visit a mosque, to visit a Hindu temple, to visit a synagogue. She's met all the popes during her reign. And really, I think this award yesterday was just a nice recognition of the fact that for her and for the Church of England, you know, they are absolutely interlinked.
Great picture of the two of them there. Of course, they were supposed to have been together at the service of Thanksgiving at St Paul's. The Queen couldn't make it. And of course, as we know, the Archbishop of Canterbury sadly had COVID and pneumonia at the time. But how significant is it to see Her Majesty without her walking stick there, do you think?
Well, I think it's very significant. I mean, these are the sort of images we were seeing, you know, during lockdown of a monarch still very much in charge, going about her duties. I mean, this is the sort of the nuts and bolts, if you like, of monarchy. It's the day-to-day stuff that we've never normally see, the sort of the audiences behind the scenes and the red boxes, all those sort of things. But I think to see her clearly in good spirits there, we're seeing obviously there's some of those great Jubilee scenes and of the beacons being lit at Windsor Castle. But you know, Windsor is very much clearly home now. It's the office now. But the way in which I think you know, she was ready to meet the Archbishop. I'm clearly very pleased to see him. As you say, he missed the Jubilee celebrations. He missed things like this, the lighting of the Tree of Trees, as you may recall. It was that was a great evening. That was on the eve of the service at St Paul's that he missed. And so yes, I imagine for Archbishop Welby, it must have been very sad. He had to sit at home and watch scenes like this on TV. But I mean, of course, there's the sort of rousing finale, if you like, to the entire 4-day Jubilee celebrations, and that, I think that's going to, that will go down in history as one of the great images there, because what you're seeing there, of course, are 4 monarchs. Effectively, there's the Queen and her 3 successors, and what a charming sight it was. And I certainly at the palace, there's a great sense that the Jubilee went extremely well. Everyone was very happy with very touched by the enormous public response to it. And so yesterday was really the Archbishop catching up, and I suspect he wanted to give that Canterbury Cross to Her Majesty during the Jubilee celebrations. Obviously, that was not to be. His place was taken at St Paul's by the Archbishop of York, who made that delightful address in which he congratulated the Queen on the eve of Derby Day, saying, "You're still in the saddle." But obviously he is the primate of all England, the Archbishop of Canterbury. So it's important that he's now had a sort of formal audience with the Queen in this very important month.
Charles and Camilla doing more of the heavy lifting, of course. I think they've just about touched down in Rwanda as we speak. What are they doing there?
Yeah, they are there to represent the Queen at the Commonwealth Summit. The Commonwealth usually meets every 2 years, all the leaders. Because of COVID, it's actually 4 years since the last summit was held here in London in 2018. So there's a lot of catching up to do there as well. And you talk about heavy lifting. I mean, there's a classic example. We've got the Prince of Wales standing in for the Queen. She's still ahead of the Commonwealth, very much ahead of the Commonwealth, very popular head of the Commonwealth. But the Commonwealth have already agreed that in the next reign, it will be the Prince of Wales who will be the next head. It's not a hereditary position, but they've, if you like, already appointed him. So he's a sort of head designate. And he's in Rwanda. Rwanda's fascinating because it's the newest member of the Commonwealth. It was never part of the British Empire. It was a Belgian colony, and a very unhappy Belgian colony, and it couldn't wait to sign up to the sort of the post-imperial British club, if you like. And that's now at the start of the Queen's reign. There were only 8 members, and now there are 54. And I mean, extraordinarily, this week it's going to go up to 55. The former French colony of Gabon has, despite speaking French and always being within the French sphere of influence, they want to join the Commonwealth. There are others in the queue. So, the Commonwealth is moving forwards. And I think the fact that it's finally getting together after 4 years, there's a lot to do. But it's a very important role for the Prince of Wales, because he's not just representing his mother and passing on her best wishes, but I mean, he's watching this organisation that he's going to lead. He's watching it sort of shape its way into the 21st century.
And roles too for William. We certainly saw that in the Jubilee. Just turned 40, I think, yesterday.
Yeah, he turns 40 this week. Now very firmly established as a sort of key player, if you like, in the sort of the operational unit of the family. I mean, he's developing his own very extensive range of interests. Notably, I mean, the Earthshot Prize, which is entirely his creation. I mean, it's the biggest environmental prize in the world. I mean, that's a great thing in its own right. But he's still getting very involved in standing in for the Queen at things like investitures, for example. He's doing a lot of those, still doing the walkabouts around the country. I think this week he's been out selling the Big Issue again. So, it's sort of royal business as usual.
It's good to see you, as always. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Kay.
Thank you. I'm just going to steal some of Mr. Raab's water, actually, while he didn't have any. Sorry about that. Excuse me. Hay fever. I don't know how you're coping with hay fever at the moment, but we've got plane trees just outside the studio, and they absolutely kill me. Now, looking at some pictures in the papers that have caught our attention. This is the front page excuse me, of the Mail this morning, showing this image of Labour MPs joining the picket lines in London supporting the rail strikes. We'll be putting that to Labour just after 8 o'clock. Love this little picture as well. Freya's picked these out for us today. A contrast in the Telegraph, little girl holding her bunny in an empty station. In the Mirror, they've got this lovely image of the summer solstice yesterday. Longest day, wasn't it? Around 6,000 druids and pagans went to Stonehenge to celebrate. Good for them. Over to Tonga for this photo, where people managed to swim with this young whale. How cool is that? And finally, better late than never, a photo here in the Mail of the 14,000 square metre moat around Tower Bridge in London that's been filled with flowers. It's another instalment of the Queen's Jubilee, but the flowers didn't quite bloom in time. Luckily, though, the instalment is here to stay. Do you remember the instalment when it was with all the poppies? And they wanted lots of volunteers to put all those poppies in. I was very lucky to be able to do that. I'll see if I can try and find one of the pictures for you later on. And take a look at this, the biggest fish on record found in Cambodia. Cambodia, even. It's 300 kilograms in weight. Amazing. Measuring it just to be on the safe side. Now, when Faye Waghorn experienced cramps and bleeding in January of 2020, she immediately sought medical advice. At just 31, she was diagnosed with cervical cancer, a disease that she is now, thankfully, free from. Faye is with us now. Hi, Faye.
Good morning.
Good morning, good morning. Excellent to hear that you are now cancer-free. Congratulations on that. Tell us about what happened to you and how you thought, this isn't right, I need to go and see the doctor.
Yeah, of course. So back in 2019, I was experiencing some lower back pain, but I suffer with hypermobility, so I kind of brushed it aside. Then I started to experience irregular bleeding. So I was someone who hadn't been for my smear test, not because I was embarrassed or worried. I'd kind of just put it to the back of my mind that cancer didn't run in my family and it wouldn't happen to me. And I was wrong.
Yeah. So what happened? And you're now cancer-free. How long was the process?
So in January 2020, New Year's Day, I was rushed into hospital with quite severe bleeding. It was around this time that the word cancer had started to be mentioned. A week later, I received my official diagnosis and it had spread to one of my lymph nodes. Then I was told I'd be getting 5 weeks of chemotherapy and external radiotherapy. And then to finish it off, it would be internal radiotherapy. And this coincided with the start of the pandemic.
Yeah, just looking at images of you there. How important is the screening process, do you think?
Yeah, so for me, if I'd have been for it, it's not a case of what ifs for me. This is hoping that someone else will listen and go. Because if I'd have gone for at least one of my regular screenings, it would have been picked up a hell of a lot earlier, and I could have even avoided treatment altogether.
Okay. Talk to us about any advice that you could offer other people, or indeed their families who might be going through this process at the moment.
I think the key thing is to talk. I think there's a lot of stigma around women's health, and I think talking to your sisters, partners, girlfriends, anyone you can with a cervix, really. There is no shame around it. We all need to do the same thing. So just look after yourself and know your own normal. If something isn't right, then go and see someone.
Okay, good to talk to you. I'm so pleased that you're better. Congratulations, well done. Thank you for taking the time to join us.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Doc Lloyd's with us, actually. Hi, Doc. It's good to see you this morning. Thanks for joining us. How effective is the screening process? Is it good enough?
Well, cancer of the cervix, of course, if we're talking specifically about that, has been one of the big success stories. So we had a very good test in the cervical smear for quite a long time now. So we were able to pick up people, provided they go for screening. And of course, our younger generation are being vaccinated against the virus that causes cervical cancer. So it's a real possibility that in the next decade or so, we will have no people dying from cancer of the cervix. So a real success story. But that does depend on people being aware that they are needed to go every 3 to 5 years for their cervical screening, and that when they get a text from their GP, they should make an appointment and get a smear. It's not the world's most pleasant thing to have done, but it is fantastically effective at screening for this very treatable condition.
People with potential signs of cancer can now also go in to see their pharmacist, can't they? Not just cervical cancer, but more generally. Is that a good idea?
Well, I think it's a fantastic idea. We, in this country, a variety of factors all seem to make us particularly bad at picking up cancer early. And of course, the earlier you pick up a cancer, the better. It's a staggering statistic, isn't it, that previous to COVID, it was about 1 patient in 4 was diagnosed in A&E. And I'm reading this week that it's now 1 patient in 3. So that by the time you've got symptoms and you feel that you have to go to A&E, usually the cancer is pretty advanced and has got less of a chance of being cured. So we've got to turn that around. So any way that we can pick up early cancer and do something about it is going to change that statistic. So having pharmacists who are, as you know, the unsung heroes of COVID, they stayed open, they did the vaccinations, they got the medications, just amazing people. It seems another job for them, but I think knowing my local pharmacists, they'll be up for it.
It might speed up diagnosis, but of course there's a huge backlog for treating cancer.
Absolutely right. So the less skilled, the less knowledgeable someone is at dealing with cancer, the more likely you are to refer someone who may not have cancer. So it will mean that for every patient that gets diagnosed of cancer through this route, there will be an awful lot of patients who won't have cancer, and it's dealing with that lot as well, and dealing with the feelings that people have, having to go through the system, and then trying to work out, of course, what those symptoms mean if they're not cancer. So it's a very complicated process and just adds, as you say, to the backlog. I have to refer every patient whose cancer risk is over 3 to 5%, which means that of every 100 patients that I refer, 95 of them won't have cancer. So that's an awful lot of people that have to be seen through the system, have very expensive tests, very time-consuming tests, and then come out the other end. So yes, it is a big, big job and just adds, as you say, to the backlog. But, you know, that's one of the things we've got to do.
Have you seen any cases of monkeypox?
Not yet. No, very exciting. I'd really like to. There are, I think, only 800 in the UK at the moment. So I don't think statistically, I hope I'll see one soon, but I haven't seen one yet. Very exciting. Really looking forward to that.
There's going to be a vaccine, am I right in saying?
What, sorry?
There's going to be a vaccine?
Well, the lucky thing, of course, is that monkeypox and smallpox are very related. And a few years ago, the United States became convinced that they were going to have germ warfare with smallpox, and so stockpiled millions of doses of smallpox vaccine. And luckily, that smallpox vaccine actually works against monkeypox as well. So we've got a ready supply of a vaccine already, where unlike COVID, we had to develop a new one. So yes, it's there. And we obviously want to try and do something with it as we've got it. And so identifying the high-risk groups in the UK and getting them vaccinated seems a sensible thing to do.
Something that you will have seen quite a lot of is people struggling with hay fever. I bring that up because I'm really struggling at the moment. What are your top tips for hay fever sufferers?
Golly, well, there are effective medicines, so please do talk to your doctor or your pharmacist. There are antihistamines, there are nasal steroids, and other chemicals that do work. And a combination works as well. And starting early, so do start taking your preventive hay fever medicines before the pollen count starts to rise, because then you've got a body that's ready for it. So don't just wait for the first sniffle. And of course, keeping the windows closed, I'm afraid, in this hot weather and staying away from the pollen also helps as well.
Lots of people don't want to take medication, though, because they think it's going to make them quite drowsy. Is that always the case?
Well, there are antihistamines that traditionally have been a tablet that can make you drowsy, but the new generation of antihistamines that you can buy over the counter don't make you drowsy. So no, they're not drowsy making. So don't hold back because of that worry.
Are those your crutches that I can see in the background there? How's your foot doing?
Embarrassing. Well, I'm coming along. It's slow and steady, but I'm doing all right.
OK, I'm glad to see you. As usual, Doc, it's great to have you on the show. Thanks very much indeed for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. What's it going to be like for hay fever sufferers today? Let's find out.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Apparently, pollen levels are going to be high, temperatures rising in the strong sunshine over the next few days, but there will be a cooler and more unsettled end to the week, which is not good news if you're going to Glastonbury. Sorry about that.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Now, proof if it were needed, that even big cats have 9 lives. A leopard fell down a well in Odisha in India and was stuck and was drowning. But villagers and emergency services used a wooden plank to help keep the leopard afloat. The rescuers then lowered a ladder into the well to allow him to climb up. They're very, very good climbers, leopards. And then he headed off, not just thrown together. He's off back into the wild. Good for him. Yeah, very, very clever climbers. Interestingly, though, did you know that lions are not very good climbers? You think that they are? They can get up a tree, they can't get down again. Let's have a look at these latest inflation figures for you. 9.1%, that's what the predictions had been, and that's exactly what they came in at, 9.1% in May. It is concerning, that's up from 9%, concerning that potentially those figures could go up to something like 11% by the end of the year. I did put that to the Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab earlier on in the programme. He said it is a problem with global inflation, but they were obviously doing everything they could, he said, to try to bring down inflation figures, but that meant that a public sector pay needed to remain low. He's talking about the rail union, the strikes yesterday, more strikes tomorrow, of course, and then on Saturday as well. This is what it looked like yesterday. And we were hearing from the Deputy Prime Minister, who was referring to the unions, the RMT union, as militant because they had gone on strike. I'm not sure that was the correct word to use, but I pressed him a couple of times and he felt that the union were being militant. The picket line is likely to be in place again tomorrow and then again on Saturday, unless the RMT union and Network Rail can come to some conclusion to end those strikes. They are meeting again, probably about 10 o'clock this morning. We are hearing that potentially an offer of 4% is being mooted. We will probably hear more about that later on. Ian King Live will be telling us about that. Conditional on reform of the railway. The big question, though, is they're offered 4% and other unions are offered 3%, including people like teachers, etc., nurses, doctors. Is that appropriate? What will those unions, will they then do? And also we've been hearing from the barristers union, criminal barristers union, they want 25%. Justice Secretary said, not a chance.